I was just wondering how much of an effect do you think behaviorism has had on the continued question of the existence of language?
The
continued question about whether or not language exists.
Oh,
and
I understand. An overwhelming impact.
Yes.
Behaviorism can't die. It doesn't matter how often it's refuted and how fully it's refuted. It comes right back to life. It's kind of like genetic somehow. Actually, I was taught just in Toronto. I was in Toronto a couple of days ago. I was talking to a very outstanding neurolinguist who works on these, done a lot of the work on these topics, and she was telling me, not as a joke, about what happens in her introductory courses. She teaches language acquisition. In her introductory language acquisition courses, the first day, she asks kids to say, how's language acquired? She's about 100% say reinforcement and association. I mean, it's been refuted so overwhelmingly that you don't know what to say about it. But you're absolutely right. It keeps coming back, and it's at the core of these computational cognitive science approaches. They don't call it behaviorism anymore, but it's sort of the same idea. Actually, behaviorism, in any serious sense, collapsed in the early 60s just for internal reasons. I mean, there were interesting things that happened that essentially wiped it out. So, for example, are you a psychologist? Oh, you know this stuff. Well, if those of you who are psychologists ought to know that a lot of this stuff's been forgotten, because people forget everything that isn't on the internet. But it's back around early 60s, there was a very interesting paper in Psych Review, the main psychological journal, by Keller and Nancy Breland. They're Skinner's two main students, the most loyal, orthodox students. They assumed, like everybody, that the game's all over. There's no point studying anything anymore. Everything's answered. So they went off into animal training. And in fact, they're the ones who trained all the famous animals, like, Flipper the dolphin and all the things that my kids watched. I don't know what you watch, but, and they discovered something. They discovered that when they were training an animal, they got the expected results up to a certain point, and then the results started to deteriorate. So, for example, I remember one case, they were training a pig to pick up a coin and put it in a mail slot and, get whatever pigs like, reinforced by some food. And according to the story, the pig is supposed to improve its behavior. Don't do any other things, just go more and more right to the coin, put it right in, don't waste any time, you get reinforced. And that worked up to a point. But then after that point, it turned out that the pigs started rooting at the coin and delaying the reinforcement and would continue to do it up to the point where it starved. Well, what was happening is what they called instinctual drift. Pigs root, that's what they are. And they were interpreting this whole coin business, some crazy thing that the experimenter made up, as just some funny kind of rooting. And they then, over time, went back to their rooting. Well, then they started looking at all the experiments in the lab. It turned out the experiments are always terminated when this begins to happen. So you get a smooth learning curve, and then things start to go haywire, so you stop the experiment. And say the Skinner experiments were pigeons pecking. Well, it turns out there's two kinds of pecking. Pigeons peck for corn, and they also peck for water. And they look kind of alike, but they're different kinds of pecking. And the things that the pigeons were able to be trained on actually were adaptations of one or the other of these kinds of pecking. You tried to get the pigeons to do something else, you get nowhere. But if you kind of modify their instinctive behavior slightly, you can sort of fool yourself into thinking you're getting results. But before too long, the animal takes over and it's doing what it was doing. So it kind of wiped out the whole field. Later work in the mid-60s already began to discover that, I remember this happening. I was involved in it. But I remember I once gave a talk at the University of Illinois or somewhere. It was a strict behaviorist department. And Talk kind of like this, it's 50 years ago, so different, but same idea, saying that you can't get anywhere with conditioning and reinforcement for the human behavior. So one guy got up, a very good behavioral animal psychologist, and said, how do you know it works for animals? So I said, I don't know, you guys say it works for animals, so I suppose you're right. And his name was Bill Brewer. And he got interested and he started redoing the animal experiments. And he started publishing some papers, and it turned out that the animals are getting reinforced only when they're aware of what's happening. If you set up the experiment, you can do some sophisticated experiments that distinguish cases where the animal doesn't know what's going on, and then it doesn't get any reinforcement, and reinforcement doesn't do anything. And other cases where the animal sort of sees what's going on, it gets reinforced. So his conclusion, and others too, was this is just information transmission. It's a reinforcement experiments are an odd way of providing the animal with information. I mean, you can't tell them peck when I tell you to, so you do it this other way. And there's more work that did that. But in more recent times, it's not even evident that conditioning exists. There is work, again, Randy Gallistel and others who've argued that it's all an artifact. It's just various ways of estimating values of variables, and the whole thing kind of collapses. But it doesn't matter. You're exactly right. No matter how much it's refuted, it's right back the next day.